The pregnancy test had been positive for quintuplets the day he filed for divorce. Now, 5 years later, she parked her golden Ferrari outside his wedding and watched her children, his children, press their faces to the window. "Are we really going to surprise Daddy?" asked Connor, the brave one. She checked her lipstick in the mirror and smiled like a woman who'd just won the lottery. Inside that cathedral, her ex-husband was about to marry her sister, completely unaware that his abandoned wife had given birth to 5 heirs to his fortune. What those children said next would trigger the most expensive custody battle in California history. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's go back 2 hours before, where it all started. The golden Ferrari F8 Tributo purred to a stop outside St. Margaret's Cathedral, its chrome wheels catching the California sun like mirrors. Through the tinted windows, 5 small faces peered out at the white stone building where wedding guests in pastels and navy suits hurried up marble steps. "Mommy, is this where Daddy is getting married?" The voice belonged to Connor, age 4, his green eyes wide with curiosity as he pressed his nose against the glass. "That's right, sweetheart." The woman behind the wheel adjusted her rearview mirror, studying her reflection. At 32, Dr. Rachel Montgomery had transformed from the broken wife who'd fled this same city 5 years ago. Her auburn hair fell in loose waves past her shoulders, and her emerald dress, the same shade as her children's eyes, hugged curves that pregnancy and hard work had sculpted into confidence. "Why can't we go inside?" asked Ethan, identical to his brother except for a small scar above his left eyebrow from a playground accident. "Because," Rachel's voice carried steel beneath its gentleness, "today is about showing everyone who we really are." In the back seat, Sophia clutched her stuffed elephant while baby Logan slept against Aiden's shoulder. 5 children. 5 miracles born from the worst moment of her life. What would you do if your biggest betrayal became your greatest blessing? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories that will restore your faith in justice. Rachel's phone buzzed. A text from her business partner. "The Today Show wants to interview you next week about the non-profit. You're changing lives, Rach." She smiled, remembering the woman who'd sobbed in her car outside the same cathedral 5 years ago, divorce papers crumpled in her lap, pregnancy test hidden in her purse. That woman had been invisible, disposable, replaced by her own sister like outdated furniture. Through the cathedral's Gothic windows, she glimpsed movement. Wedding guests filling oak pews. Flowers in white and gold. Her old favorite colors, the ones he'd chosen for their wedding 7 years ago. "Look, Mommy." Sophia pointed as a white Rolls-Royce glided past them toward the church entrance. "Pretty car." "Not as pretty as ours," Connor declared, running his small hands along the leather seats. Rachel watched the Rolls-Royce door open. First came a Jimmy Choo heel, then a cascade of honey blonde hair, then the woman who'd destroyed everything. Her sister Katie emerged in ivory silk, playing bride at 34, finally getting everything she'd envied since childhood. Behind Katie stepped the groom, Thomas Whitmore, 45, silver-haired and commanding in his black tuxedo. The man who'd once promised Rachel forever, who'd whispered plans for children as they'd made love, who'd thrown her out when she'd needed him most. "He looks sad," Ethan observed with 4-year-old honesty. Rachel studied Thomas's face through the distance. Even from here, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the forced smile that never reached his eyes anymore. Katie clung to his arm possessively, the same way she'd clung to Rachel's toys as children, breaking them within days. "Sometimes people make choices that hurt their hearts," Rachel told her son. "But we don't have to let their choices hurt ours." She'd spent 5 years building something beautiful from the ashes of that choice. The Montgomery Foundation provided homes for single mothers, funded by the medical practice she'd built from nothing after selling her wedding ring for tuition money. 5 children who called her Supermom. A life that meant something. A knock on the passenger window made her jump. Dr. Anthony Romano stood outside, devastatingly handsome in his charcoal suit, worry creasing his Italian features. "Second thoughts?" he asked as she lowered the window. "Never." She squeezed his hand. "You don't have to do this with me." Try to stop me." His smile melted the last of her doubts. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't run him over with this thing." Anthony had entered her life 8 months ago as the pediatric cardiologist treating Logan's heart murmur. He'd stayed because he'd fallen in love with all 6 of them. Her and the 5 reasons her heart kept beating. "Kids ready for their grand entrance?" Anthony asked, leaning into the car to ruffle Connor's hair. "We've been practicing," Sophia announced. "Connor knows how to hold the door, and Ethan knows how to carry Logan, and Aiden knows how to walk without tripping." "And what do you know how to do, princess?" "Smile pretty for the cameras." Rachel's chest tightened. In 10 minutes, she'd walk into that cathedral and face 300 people who'd watched her marriage implode. Society reporters were already gathering outside, drawn by whispers about the golden Ferrari and the mysterious woman who'd requested 5 extra seats in the back row. She'd RSVP'd under her maiden name, Dr. Rachel Montgomery +5. The wedding invitation had arrived at her medical practice 6 weeks ago. Katie's final cruelty, ensuring Rachel knew she'd lost completely. Except Rachel hadn't lost. She'd won everything that mattered. "Daddy's here," Aiden shouted suddenly. Through the windshield, Rachel watched Thomas step out of the Rolls-Royce. Even at this distance, even after everything, her heart recognized the man she'd once loved with desperate intensity. The man who'd chosen her sister over the family they'd created together. He'd never seen his children. Never knew their names. Never felt Connor's arms around his neck or heard Sophia's laugh or watched Ethan's serious face puzzle through picture books. His loss. Her gain. "Time to go," she whispered, checking her reflection one last time. The woman in the mirror had weathered storms and emerged golden. Ready to show the world exactly what Thomas Whitmore had thrown away. The cathedral bells began to ring, calling guests to witness a union built on betrayal. But today, Rachel would show them what real victory looked like. She opened her door, designer heels clicking against asphalt. 5 beautiful children scrambling out behind her like living proof that sometimes the best revenge was an extraordinary life. The cathedral's heavy oak doors opened with a whisper that cut through the wedding march like a blade. Every head turned as Rachel Montgomery stepped into the sanctuary, her emerald dress flowing behind her like liquid fire. The organist's fingers faltered on the keys. Conversations died mid-sentence. Behind her walked 5 children in matching navy outfits, their green eyes scanning the ornate interior with wonder. Connor held Sophia's hand. Ethan carried sleeping Logan against his shoulder with practiced 4-year-old care. Aiden walked beside Anthony Romano, whose protective presence commanded its own attention. "Dear God," someone whispered from the front pew. "Are those?" Thomas Whitmore stood frozen at the altar, his face draining of color as his gaze locked onto the children. The same green eyes that had stared back at him from his bathroom mirror every morning for 45 years now multiplied by 5, framed by auburn curls that mirrored their mother's. Katie's bouquet trembled in her hands. "No," she breathed loud enough for the front 3 rows to hear. "This isn't happening." Rachel moved down the center aisle with unhurried grace, her children flanking her like a small army. Flash photography erupted from society reporters who'd somehow gained entry. The Newport Beach Register. California Today. Entertainment reporters who'd caught wind of something extraordinary unfolding. "Mommy," Sophia whispered. "Why is everyone staring?" "Because you're beautiful, baby girl," Rachel replied, never breaking stride. Pastor Williams cleared his throat at the altar, his prepared sermon forgotten as he watched the most dramatic interruption of his 30-year career. "Ladies and gentlemen, if we could please." "Continue," Rachel called out as she settled into the back pew, Anthony beside her, 5 children arranged like living testimony. "Don't let us interrupt this blessed occasion." The sarcasm in her voice cut deeper than screaming would have. Murmurs rippled through the congregation as guests craned their necks to stare at the quintuplets. Thomas's mother, Eleanor Whitmore, gripped her pearl necklace so tightly her knuckles went white. "Those children," Eleanor whispered to her husband. "Frederick, look at those children." At the altar, Thomas tried to focus on Katie's face, but his eyes kept drifting past her shoulder to the back of the cathedral. 5 small faces that looked exactly like his baby pictures. The mathematical impossibility of it hit him like a physical blow. Rachel had been pregnant when he'd thrown her out. The children he'd always claimed he didn't want were sitting 30 feet away. Proof of the family he'd destroyed for a woman who'd been warming his bed while his wife carried his babies. "Thomas," Katie hissed through her smile, gripping his hands. "Look at me. Only at me." But he couldn't. Connor chose that moment to wave at him, a cheerful 4-year-old greeting that sent shockwaves through the assembled guests. Thomas's knees nearly buckled. "Let's proceed with the ceremony," Pastor Williams announced, desperation creeping into his voice. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Rachel pulled out her phone and began recording. Not the ceremony, but her children's reactions to seeing their father for the first time. Sophia's wide-eyed wonder. Ethan's serious study of the altar decorations. Connor's whispered questions about the pretty windows. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was documenting their innocence while their father married the woman who'd helped destroy their family before they were born. "Do you, Thomas Frederick Whitmore, take Catherine Rose Montgomery to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The name Montgomery echoed through the cathedral like an accusation. Katie had even stolen Rachel's maiden name when she'd legally changed hers for the wedding announcements. Thomas opened his mouth to speak, but no sound emerged. His gaze found Rachel's across the rows of guests. She sat perfectly still, radiating the kind of calm that came from knowing you'd already won. "I." Thomas's voice cracked. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cathedral's air conditioning. "He does," Katie answered for him, her voice sharp with panic. "He absolutely does." "Thomas," Pastor Williams prompted, "do you take Katie to be your wife?" The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Thomas stared at his children, memorizing details he'd never thought he'd see. The way Connor's hair curled at his temples, exactly like Thomas's had as a boy. Sophia's small hands folded in her lap, the gesture achingly familiar from watching Rachel during their own wedding ceremony. These weren't just children. They were his children. His family. The future he'd thrown away for stolen nights with a woman who'd never loved him, only what he could provide. "Thomas." Katie's whisper carried the desperation of a woman watching her carefully constructed lie crumble in real time. He turned to look at her properly for the first time in months. The honey blonde hair was the same shade Rachel's had been before she'd stopped coloring it. The blue eyes were the same shade as Rachel's contacts before she'd embraced her natural green. Even the dress was a replica of Rachel's wedding gown, altered to fit Katie's shorter frame. He'd married a pale imitation and called it an upgrade. "I." Thomas looked back at Rachel one more time. She wasn't crying, wasn't pleading, wasn't doing anything except sitting there like living proof that he'd made the worst mistake of his life. "I do," he finally whispered, the words falling like stones into a deep well. Katie's triumphant smile could have powered the cathedral's lighting. She'd won and everyone knew it. The ring slid onto her finger with practiced precision, sealing a union built on betrayal and sustained by pride. "You may kiss the bride," Pastor Williams announced with relief. As Thomas's lips met Katie's, the camera flashes intensified. But every photographer in the building knew the real story wasn't happening at the altar. It was sitting in the back pew, where 5 children watched their father marry their aunt while their mother filmed their reactions for the inevitable court case. The kiss ended, and Thomas and Katie turned to face the congregation as husband and wife. The applause was polite but strained, every guest acutely aware they'd witnessed something unprecedented. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pastor Williams announced, "I present Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Whitmore." As the newlyweds began their procession down the aisle, Rachel stood. Her children rose with her like a choreographed response. Anthony's hand found the small of her back, steadying her for what came next. The aisle had never seemed longer. With each step toward the cathedral doors, Thomas felt the weight of 5 pairs of green eyes tracking his movement. When he drew parallel to their pew, Connor spoke with devastating 4-year-old clarity. "Mommy, is that our daddy?" The words hit Thomas like physical blows. He stumbled, nearly pulling Katie down with him. The entire cathedral heard Connor's innocent question, and the resulting silence was deafening. Rachel's voice carried clearly through the stillness. "Yes, sweetheart. That's your father." Thomas stopped walking, turned, looked directly at his son for the first time. Connor smiled and waved again. "Hi, Daddy. I'm Connor." Thomas's carefully constructed composure shattered completely. Tears ran down his face as he stared at the boy who had his eyes, his smile, his fearless approach to the world. "Thomas." Katie yanked his arm viciously. "We're leaving. Now." But Thomas couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't process that he'd just married another woman while his children watched, believing it was normal for daddies to ignore their families. The camera flashes reached blinding intensity as society photographers captured the moment a Newport Beach wedding became a national news story. The golden Ferrari in the parking lot suddenly made perfect sense to everyone present. Rachel gathered her children and began moving toward the side exit, Anthony's protective presence clearing a path through the stunned congregation. She'd accomplished exactly what she'd come to do. She'd shown Thomas Whitmore what he'd lost. And now the whole world would know the truth. The wedding reception unfolded like a beautiful disaster. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across tables draped in ivory silk, while 500 guests pretended not to whisper about the morning's revelation. The Newport Beach Country Club's ballroom had been transformed into Katie's dream venue, but the dream had curdled into something unrecognizable. Thomas stood at the head table, champagne flute untouched, staring at his phone screen. The video had already gone viral. Millionaire's secret quintuplets crash his wedding topped trending lists across 3 social media platforms. 23 million views in 4 hours. "Put that away," Katie hissed, her smile never wavering as she waved to guests. "People are watching." "They're my children, Katie." The words felt foreign in his mouth, like speaking a language he'd forgotten. "5 of them. How did I not know?" "Because you chose not to know." Her voice carried venom disguised as sweetness. "You threw her out, remember? You wanted nothing to do with whatever she was carrying." The memory hit him like cold water. Rachel, 27 and glowing, approaching him with a pregnancy test hidden behind her back. His immediate panic. The accusations. The assumption that she'd trapped him on purpose. He'd been preparing to leave her anyway. Katie had already been in his bed for 3 months, whispering that Rachel was boring, predictable, holding him back from his potential. The pregnancy had simply provided convenient justification for the inevitable. "I thought." Thomas set down his champagne. "The timing was wrong. We'd been having problems." "Because I told you we were having problems." Katie's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "God, Thomas, you're such an idiot sometimes." Across the ballroom, his mother approached with the determined stride of a woman on a mission. Eleanor Whitmore had spent 68 years navigating Newport Beach society, and she'd never encountered a social catastrophe quite like this morning's revelation. "Thomas." She sat beside him without invitation. "We need to discuss damage control." "Mother, please. Not now. Especially now." Eleanor's pearls caught the light as she leaned forward. "Those children are Whitmore's. They belong in this family, not with some." She searched for diplomatic phrasing. "Some single mother playing doctor." Katie's fork clattered against her plate. "Those bastards belong nowhere near this family." The word hung in the air like acid. Eleanor's eyebrows rose to dangerous heights. "Excuse me." Eleanor's voice could have frozen champagne. "Those are my grandchildren you're discussing." "They're mistakes," Katie snapped, all pretense of sweetness evaporating. Thomas was smart to walk away the first time. Thomas watched his mother's face transform from disapproval to Arctic fury. Eleanor Whitmore had waited 7 years for grandchildren. She'd endured Thomas's divorce, his scandalous affair with his sister-in-law, even this morning's humiliation. But insulting her newfound grandchildren was unforgivable. "Perhaps," Eleanor said with deadly calm, "the mistake was this farce of a wedding." She rose and walked away, leaving Katie trembling with rage and Thomas drowning in champagne and regret. Meanwhile, at the Montgomery Beach house, 3:15 p.m., Rachel kicked off her heels and sank into the white sectional sofa overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, she watched her children build sandcastles while Anthony supervised from a beach chair, his suit jacket abandoned on the deck railing. The beach house had been her sanctuary for 5 years. Purchased with the settlement money from her medical malpractice insurance after a drunk driver had nearly ended her career, it represented everything she'd built from nothing. Clean lines, natural materials, and enough space for 5 children to grow up wild and free. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since they'd left the cathedral. Interview requests from national morning shows. Publishers wanting book rights to her story. Documentary filmmakers sensing Oscar potential in the golden Ferrari footage. Dr. Montgomery. Her housekeeper Maria appeared with chamomile tea and knowing eyes. The children are asking when they'll see their father again. Rachel's stomach clenched. She'd prepared for many reactions to today's revelation, but not her children's innocent expectation that having a daddy meant being part of his life. What did you tell them? That daddies are complicated. Maria settled beside her with maternal authority. But they're 4 years old, Mija. Complicated doesn't satisfy them for long. Through the window, Rachel watched Connor chase seagulls while shouting, "Daddy liked my wave. Did you see him smile at my wave?" The joy in his voice was devastating. She'd convinced herself that disrupting the wedding would provide closure. Proof that she'd survived. Justice for the woman who'd been discarded like broken furniture. But she hadn't considered how seeing Thomas would affect the children who'd never known they were missing anything. "He had 37 months to find us," Rachel said, more to herself than to Maria. 37 months to wonder if I'd been telling the truth about the pregnancy. To Google my name. To care. And now he's married to my sister. And I'm supposed to what? Pretend this morning never happened? Go back to our life like nothing changed. But everything had changed. The moment Connor had called Thomas daddy in that cathedral, the careful walls Rachel had built around her family had cracked. Her children knew they had a father. Worse, they liked him. Her phone buzzed with a text from her attorney. Thomas's legal team wants to schedule a meeting. Visitation rights. Call me. Rachel deleted the message without responding. 5 years too late for legal teams and visitation schedules. 5 years too late for anything except the mess he'd created by choosing the wrong sister. Anthony appeared in the doorway, sand between his toes and concern creasing his forehead. "Kids are asking about dinner. Also, there's a news van pulling into the driveway." "Hide the Ferrari," Rachel said automatically. "And order pizza. The children don't need to see this circus." He sat beside her, his presence steady and uncomplicated in a way that still surprised her after 8 months together. "You okay?" "I thought I would be." She leaned into his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent of soap and sea air. "I thought showing him what he'd lost would make me feel vindicated. And instead I feel like I opened a door I can never close again." Rachel watched Sophia discover a sand dollar, her face lighting up with wonder. "They think they have a daddy now. How do I explain that daddies don't automatically love you just because you share DNA?" Anthony's hand found hers, steady and warm. "You don't explain it. You show them what real love looks like every day. Just like you've been doing." Outside, the news van disgorged reporters and camera equipment. Rachel's private sanctuary was about to become public property, dissected for entertainment value by people who'd never held a sobbing 4-year-old asking why daddy didn't want to meet them. "I should have stayed home," she whispered. "Should have let him marry her in peace. Should have let him never know he had 5 incredible children." Anthony's voice carried gentle challenge. "Those kids deserve to see their father, even if he doesn't deserve them." The truth of it settled in her chest like cold stone. She'd disrupted the wedding for herself, convincing herself it was about justice. But Connor's innocent wave, Sophia's wonder at the pretty church, Ethan's serious study of the man who'd given him those green eyes, they'd been the real victims of Thomas's choices. And now they knew what they were missing. The doorbell rang, followed by Maria's firm voice declining interviews. Rachel closed her eyes and tried to imagine a world where this morning had never happened, where Thomas remained a distant figure in legal documents, and her children continued believing that families came in all shapes, including theirs. But that world was gone now, destroyed by a golden Ferrari and 5 words. "Is that our daddy?" Thomas sat surrounded by mahogany bookshelves and the ghosts of better decisions. A laptop opened to security footage from the hospital where Rachel had given birth. The private investigator he'd hired 12 hours ago had worked through the night, and the results painted a picture that made Thomas's chest feel carved out with a spoon. The timestamp read March 3, 2015. 2:47 a.m. On the grainy black and white screen, Rachel emerged from a taxi outside Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, doubled over in obvious pain. Alone. No family, no friends, no husband to hold her hand through the terror of delivering 5 babies 6 weeks early. She was in labor for 14 hours, the investigator had explained over the phone. Complications with baby E, that's Logan. Touch and go for 3 days. She never left the NICU. Thomas replayed the footage, watching his ex-wife struggle up hospital steps while he'd been honeymooning in Cabo with her sister. The date stamp proved it. Katie had insisted on moving their elopement up by 2 weeks, claiming she couldn't wait another moment to be his wife. She'd known. Katie had known Rachel was about to give birth, and she'd deliberately taken Thomas out of the country. Watching home movies? Katie's voice cut through his concentration like a blade. She stood in the doorway wearing his favorite yellow sundress, the one that had driven him wild during their affair. Now it looked like costume jewelry, shiny but worthless. Why didn't you tell me? Thomas's voice came out hoarse from crying over hospital records and birth certificates he'd never seen. Tell you what. Katie moved to the bar cart, pouring herself a mimosa despite the early hour. That she was giving birth while we were in Mexico. He turned the laptop screen toward her. You knew, didn't you? Katie's champagne flute paused halfway to her lips. I knew she was pathetic enough to go through with it, yes. The casual cruelty in her voice hit him like a physical blow. 5 babies, Katie. She delivered 5 babies alone because you manipulated our wedding date. I saved you from 18 years of child support. Katie settled into the leather chair across from his desk, crossing her legs with practiced seduction. You should thank me. Thomas stared at this woman he'd married 24 hours ago, really seeing her for the first time. The honey blonde hair that had seemed so sophisticated now looked artificial under the morning light. The blue eyes that had seemed so vibrant were cold, calculating. She was beautiful the way a viper was beautiful. Stunning until you realized it could kill you. Show me the rest, Katie said, gesturing toward the laptop. I assume you've bought yourself a complete surveillance package of your ex-wife's tragic single motherhood. Thomas's finger hovered over the trackpad. The investigator had provided 5 years of Rachel's life in digital form. Medical records showing Logan's heart surgery at 6 months old. School enrollment forms listing father unknown in careful handwriting. Bank statements revealing the sale of her engagement ring to pay for medical school tuition. He clicked on a folder labeled Current Status, and immediately wished he hadn't. The screen filled with photos of Rachel at her medical practice, white coat pristine as she examined tiny patients. Rachel at charity galas, raising money for single mothers. Rachel at the beach house with 5 children who clearly worshipped her, building blanket forts and teaching them to surf. In every image, she glowed with the kind of contentment Thomas had forgotten existed. Success looked good on her. Motherhood looked even better. She's a pediatric surgeon now, he said, more to himself than to Katie. Congratulations. She found a career playing with children. Very fitting. She founded a non-profit that's housed over 300 single mothers. Thomas scrolled through testimonials from women whose lives Rachel had saved. She's been nominated for the California Woman of the Year award. Again, congratulations. Your ex-wife is a saint. Are we done with this pity party? Thomas clicked on a video file dated 2 weeks ago. The footage showed Rachel at a hospital playground, pushing Connor on a swing while Sophia chased Bubbles and the other boys played soccer. Her laugh carried clearly through the speakers. The same laugh that had made him fall in love with her 8 years ago. A man appeared at the edge of the frame, tall and dark-haired, approaching with obvious familiarity. The children ran to him, wrapping around his legs like he belonged there. He scooped up Sophia and spun her around, then kissed Rachel's forehead with tender intimacy. Thomas's blood turned to ice water. Who is that? Katie's mimosa hit the desk with enough force to crack the crystal. Dr. Anthony Romano, Thomas read from the investigator's notes. Pediatric cardiologist. Been treating Logan's heart condition for 8 months. Moved in with Rachel 6 weeks ago. The man in the video, Anthony, was everything Thomas had forgotten how to be. Patient with the children, gentle with Rachel, completely present in the moment. When Logan totaled toward the playground equipment, Anthony caught him before he could fall, swinging the little boy up onto his shoulders like it was the most natural thing in the world. "She's replacing you," Katie said, venom dripping from every word. "Moving on with some doctor who probably makes half what you do." But Thomas wasn't listening. He was watching Logan, his son, his baby, reach up to touch Anthony's face with complete trust. The same gesture Connor had made yesterday when he'd waved across the cathedral, believing his daddy would wave back. These children didn't know they were missing anything because Anthony Romano had filled the space Thomas had abandoned. Logan's first steps, Connor's first day of school, Sophia's first skinned knee. Another man had been there for all of it. "I need to see them," Thomas said suddenly. "Absolutely not. They're my children, Katie. They're mistakes you were smart enough to walk away from the first time." Katie moved around the desk, pressing herself against his chair. "Thomas, baby, look at me. Really look." He turned, and she cupped his face in perfectly manicured hands. "I'm your wife now. I'm the only family you need. Those children are a complication from your past. Let Rachel play house with her doctor boyfriend. You have everything you want right here." For a moment, Thomas almost believed her. Katie was beautiful, sophisticated, uncomplicated. No midnight feedings, no soccer practices, no college funds to worry about. Just elegant dinners and charity galas and the kind of marriage that looked perfect in society photographs. Then Logan's giggle echoed from a laptop speakers, and Thomas remembered what he'd given up for this illusion of perfection. "I want to meet them," he said firmly. Katie's face transformed, beauty curdling into something ugly and desperate. "Meet them. Thomas, you can't just waltz into their lives because you're having buyer's remorse about our marriage." "I'm not having buyer's remorse. I'm having a reckoning." He stood, moving away from her touch, and Katie's carefully constructed world began to crack at the edges. "If you contact Rachel, I'll divorce you," she threatened. "I'll take half of everything and make sure every person in Newport Beach knows you abandoned your wife for your bastard children." Thomas looked at her, really looked, and saw exactly what Rachel must have seen 5 years ago. A woman so consumed with winning that she'd destroy anything standing between her and her prize, including 5 innocent children. "Maybe," Thomas said quietly, "that would be the best thing that could happen to me." Katie's champagne flute shattered against the wall behind his head. Rachel stood at the end of the wooden pier, watching Anthony teach her children how to cast fishing lines into the Pacific. 2 days had passed since the wedding catastrophe, and she'd finally agreed to venture out of the beach house when the media circus moved on to fresher scandals. "Mommy, look." Sophia held up a tiny fish, silver scales catching the afternoon sun. "I caught dinner." "That's a minnow, princess," Anthony laughed, gently helping her release it back into the water. "We need something a little bigger to feed this crew." Rachel's phone buzzed. Another message from Thomas's lawyer. The 15th since Monday. She deleted it without reading, just like the others. Whatever Thomas wanted to say, he'd had 5 years to figure out how to say it. "Dr. Montgomery?" A familiar voice made her turn. Eleanor Whitmore approached with the careful dignity of a woman navigating a minefield. Thomas's mother looked every inch the Newport Beach matriarch in her cream linen suit and pearls, but her eyes held something Rachel had never seen before, uncertainty. "Mrs. Whitmore." Rachel's voice remained neutral, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I asked around until someone mentioned you frequented this pier with the children." Anthony glanced over from where he was untangling Connor's fishing line, ready to intervene if needed. Rachel gave him a subtle shake of her head. This conversation had been inevitable since Sunday morning. "What can I do for you?" Rachel asked. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the children, drinking in details like a woman dying of thirst. "They're beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you." Connor has Thomas's stubborn cowlick. Sophia has his dimples. And little Logan. Eleanor's voice caught. He looks exactly like Thomas did as a baby. Rachel followed her gaze to where Logan toddled along the pier, one chubby hand gripping Anthony's finger for balance. At 18 months, he was pure sunshine and mischief. The miracle baby who'd survive heart surgery and come out stronger. "What do you want, Mrs. Whitmore?" Eleanor turned back to her, tears threatening the careful composure of 68 years. "I want to know my grandchildren. I want to be part of their lives. I want—" She took a shaky breath. "I want to apologize for the choices my son made." The sincerity in her voice caught Rachel off guard. During her marriage to Thomas, Eleanor had been politely distant, never quite approving of her son's choice to marry a middle-class teacher instead of Newport Beach royalty. "I can't undo what Thomas did," Eleanor continued. "But I can try to be the grandmother these children deserve. If you'll let me." "Mommy." Ethan ran over, his serious face bright with excitement. "The nice lady looks like Daddy." Eleanor's breath caught as Ethan studied her with 4-year-old directness. "You have the same green eyes," he announced. "Are you Daddy's mommy?" "I am," Eleanor whispered, kneeling to his level. "I'm your grandmother." "We don't have a grandmother," Ethan said matter-of-factly. "Mommy said her parents live far away." "Well, now you do have one. If that's okay with your mother." Rachel watched Eleanor's face transform as Ethan reached out to touch her pearls with reverent curiosity. This was dangerous territory. Allowing the Whitmore family into their carefully constructed world meant opening doors that could never be closed again. But Eleanor wasn't Thomas. She hadn't made the choices that had destroyed their family. Grammy Eleanor. Sophia appeared suddenly, having overheard the conversation with typical 4-year-old intuition. "Do you like fishing?" "I don't know, sweetheart. I've never tried." "Anthony can teach you. He teaches everybody." Sophia grabbed Eleanor's hand with complete trust, tugging her toward the fishing poles. Rachel watched her former mother-in-law allow herself to be led by a granddaughter she'd just met, and something tight in her chest began to loosen. The children needed family beyond her limited circle. They deserved grandparents, cousins, the kind of extended support system she'd been trying to provide single-handedly for 5 years. "She seems nice." Anthony appeared at her shoulder. Logan balanced on his hip. "She's complicated. The whole family is complicated." "Most families are." He pressed a kiss to her temple, Logan giggling at the display of affection. "Question is whether the complication is worth it." Rachel watched Eleanor laugh as Sophia explained the finer points of worm selection, her careful composure melting under her granddaughter's enthusiastic instruction. Connor and Ethan had gravitated toward their newfound grandmother like flowers toward sunlight, hungry for the family connection they'd never known they were missing. "She could give them things I can't," Rachel admitted. "Stability, resources, a sense of belonging to something bigger than just us." "You've given them everything that matters." "Have I?" Rachel's voice carried 5 years of doubt. "Look at them with her. They're starving for family, and I've been so focused on protecting them from Thomas that I never considered they might benefit from knowing his mother." Eleanor squealed as Sophia's fishing line jerked with a genuine catch, her dignified facade completely abandoned in favor of grandmotherly excitement. The sight made Rachel's throat tight with unexpected emotion. "What are you thinking?" Anthony asked gently. "I'm thinking that maybe the wedding wasn't the ending I thought it was. Maybe it was just the beginning of something else." Her phone buzzed again. This time, instead of Thomas's lawyer, the caller ID showed Thomas himself. Rachel stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the decline button. "Answer it," Anthony said quietly. "Whatever he has to say, you're strong enough to hear it." Rachel accepted the call but didn't speak, waiting for Thomas to break the silence. "Rachel." His voice sounded hollow, exhausted. "Please don't hang up." "What do you want, Thomas?" "I want to explain. I want to apologize. I want—" He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "I want to meet my children. Properly. Not as a stranger in a cathedral, but as their father." Rachel watched Eleanor help Connor reel in what appeared to be a genuine fish, his face glowing with accomplishment as his newfound grandmother cheered his success. "It's too late for explanations," Rachel said finally. "Is it too late for everything?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. 5 years of anger, hurt, and careful rebuilding couldn't be erased by a phone call and an apology. But watching her children with Eleanor, seeing their hunger for family connection, Rachel realized that maybe forgiveness wasn't about Thomas at all. Maybe it was about giving her children every opportunity to know where they came from, even if where they were going was uncertain. "Your mother is here," Rachel said. "At the pier. With the children." Silence stretched across the phone line. "She is. They like her. She's—" Rachel searched for words. "She's good with them. I could be good with them too. If you gave me a chance." Rachel closed her eyes, feeling the weight of a decision that would affect 6 lives. 1 meeting. Supervised. At my house. If you hurt them, Thomas, if you disappoint them or make them feel unwanted for even a second, you'll never see them again. Thank you. His voice broke on the words. "Rachel, thank you." She hung up before he could say anything else, her hands shaking as she watched her children experience the joy of extended family for the first time. Whatever happened next, there was no going back to the safety of their isolated world. The golden Ferrari had opened doors that led to complicated places, but maybe complicated was exactly what her children needed to understand that families came in all shapes, even broken ones trying to heal. Thomas stood on Rachel's front porch, his hands shaking as he gripped a bag of carefully chosen gifts. Through the windows, he could hear his children's laughter mixing with ocean waves, a sound both beautiful and devastating because he'd missed 5 years of it. The door opened before he could knock. Rachel stood there in jeans and a white sweater, her auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked younger than she had at the wedding, softer somehow, but her green eyes held steel. "They're excited to meet you," she said without preamble. "Don't make me regret this." Thomas nodded, not trusting his voice. Through the doorway, he glimpsed his children playing in a living room filled with natural light and comfortable furniture. No marble surfaces or crystal chandeliers. Just a home where children could be children. "Daddy." Connor spotted him first, launching himself forward with 4-year-old enthusiasm. Thomas caught him instinctively, his heart stopping as small arms wrapped around his neck. "You came." Connor pulled back to study Thomas's face with serious green eyes. "Mommy said you might come visit us." Thomas's voice cracked. "I wanted to meet you properly." The other children gathered around with varying degrees of curiosity and shyness. Sophia hid behind Anthony's legs but peeked out with obvious interest. Ethan approached with careful dignity, extending his hand like a miniature businessman. "I'm Ethan Thomas Montgomery," he announced. "I'm 4 years old and I can read chapter books." Thomas shook his son's small hand, nearly undone by the middle name Rachel had given him despite everything. "It's nice to meet you, Ethan. I brought some books I thought you might like." Logan toddled over last, gripping Anthony's finger for balance. Thomas stared at his youngest son, memorizing the chubby cheeks and bright eyes that mirrored his own baby pictures. "That's Logan," Rachel said softly. "He had heart surgery when he was 6 months old. He's doing beautifully now." Heart surgery. Thomas's vision blurred as he processed that his baby had nearly died while he'd been playing house with Katie, completely unaware of his children's existence. "Can I?" Thomas knelt down, extending his hand to Logan. "Can I say hello, buddy?" Logan studied him with the fearless curiosity of an 18-month-old, then toddled forward and patted Thomas's cheek with sticky fingers. "Dada," Logan babbled, the sound hitting Thomas like a physical blow. "He calls Anthony Papa," Connor explained helpfully. "But Mommy said you're our daddy." Thomas looked up at Anthony Romano, the man who'd been father to his children while he'd been playing the role of husband to the wrong woman. Anthony met his gaze with careful neutrality, protective but not hostile. "Thank you," Thomas said quietly, "for taking care of them." Anthony nodded once. "They're easy to love." The simple words contained multitudes. These children, Thomas's children, had been loved, protected, and cherished by a man who owed them nothing. While Thomas had been building walls, Anthony had been building a family. "Daddy, want to see my room?" Sophia emerged from behind Anthony's legs, her shyness overcome by excitement. "I have a princess castle." The next hour passed in a blur of small revelations. Connor's obsession with dinosaurs, Ethan's impressive vocabulary and serious approach to everything, Sophia's dramatic flair for storytelling, Logan's infectious giggle and fearless exploration of everything within reach. They were perfect. All of them. Beautiful, intelligent, kind children who should have been the center of Thomas's universe for the past 5 years. "They're incredible," Thomas told Rachel as they watched the children show him their latest art projects. "You've done an amazing job with them." "We've done an amazing job," Rachel corrected, glancing at Anthony. "It takes more than one person to raise 5 children." The pronoun hit Thomas like a slap. We. Rachel and Anthony. The family he'd inadvertently created by abandoning his responsibilities. "Rachel, I need to tell you something." Thomas's voice carried urgency. "About Katie. About what really happened." Rachel's expression cooled. "The children don't need to hear this conversation." "Kids," Anthony called out. "Who wants to help me make snacks in the kitchen?" The children followed Anthony out, chattering excitedly about their daddy's visit. When they were alone, Rachel turned to Thomas with arms crossed. "Say what you came to say. Katie knew you were pregnant when I left. She planned the whole thing. The timing of our affair, convincing me you were trying to trap me, even moving up our elopement so I'd be out of the country when you gave birth." Rachel's face went white. "What?" "I found security footage from the hospital. You were in labor while we were honeymooning in Cabo. She knew, Rachel. She knew you were having the babies, and she made sure I wasn't there." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Rachel sank onto the couch, her hands trembling. "5 babies," she whispered. "I delivered 5 babies alone because my sister wanted to make sure you couldn't change your mind." "If I had known." "You would have what?" Rachel's voice turned sharp. "Come running back. Chosen me over her? You were already sleeping with Katie, Thomas. Already planning to leave me. The pregnancy was just convenient timing." Thomas felt the truth of her words like acid in his throat. He had been looking for an exit from their marriage, convinced that Katie represented excitement and freedom while Rachel represented obligation and routine. "I was wrong," he said desperately. "About everything. About you, about what I wanted, about what mattered. Now you're wrong." Rachel stood, pacing to the window where she could see Anthony making sandwiches with their children. 5 years too late to matter. "It matters to me. It doesn't matter to them." Rachel's voice cracked. "Do you see how they look at Anthony? He's their father in every way that counts. You're just the man who provided DNA." The words hit Thomas like physical blows, but he couldn't argue with their truth. Anthony had earned his place in this family through midnight feedings and first steps and emergency room visits. Thomas had earned nothing except the right to stand on the outside looking in. "I want to be part of their lives," Thomas said. "I want to try to earn what Anthony already has." "And Katie? What about your wife?" Thomas's silence stretched too long. Rachel's eyes hardened as she read the answer in his hesitation. "You're still married to my sister. You still go home to her every night. You still share a bed with the woman who orchestrated the destruction of our family." Rachel's voice rose with each word. "You want to play daddy on weekends while honeymooning with my sister every night? It's complicated. It's simple." Rachel moved toward the kitchen where sounds of laughter echoed. "You made your choice 5 years ago. You made it again 3 days ago when you said, 'I do' to Katie. You don't get to unmake those choices now because you've discovered what you threw away." "Rachel, please. The visit is over." Her voice carried final authority. "Say goodbye to the children. Thank them for letting you see their home. And then leave." Thomas felt his world cracking apart as he realized the magnitude of what he'd lost. Not just 5 children but the chance to be the man they needed. He'd burned that bridge when he'd chosen Katie's lies over Rachel's truth. In the kitchen, 5 children looked up at him with expectant faces, waiting for him to prove he was worth their love. He knew he wasn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But he'd spend the rest of his life trying to become the father they deserved, even if it was too late to matter. "I have to go now," Thomas told them, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. "But I'm so glad I got to meet you. All of you. Will you come back?" Connor asked with devastating innocence. Thomas looked at Rachel, seeing his answer in her closed expression. "I hope so, buddy. I really hope so." But as he walked to his car, leaving behind the sound of his children's laughter, Thomas knew that hope wasn't enough to rebuild what he'd destroyed. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be repaired. Only replaced. Thomas sat in his study, staring at divorce papers that had materialized on his desk like an ultimatum. Katie's handwriting adorned sticky notes attached to highlighted sections. "Sign here to keep half your assets, or lose everything chasing fantasies." She'd made her position clear during their explosive fight 3 hours earlier. Choose the children or choose her. Choose the messy complications of fatherhood or the clean simplicity of their childless marriage. Choose the family he'd abandoned or the woman who'd helped him abandon them. The house felt hollow around him, all marble surfaces and designer furniture chosen for aesthetic impact rather than comfort. No toys scattered across expensive rugs. No children's artwork taped to refrigerator doors. No life at all, really. His phone sat silent on the desk. No calls from Rachel. No messages. No invitation to return to the beach house where his children were probably sleeping in beds he'd never seen, dreaming dreams he'd never shared. He'd burned that bridge this afternoon when he'd admitted he was still married to Katie. The look in Rachel's eyes had been devastating. Not anger, but disappointed resignation. She'd expected nothing from him, and he'd managed to deliver less than nothing. Meanwhile, at the Montgomery Beach House, 11:45 p.m. Rachel sat on her bedroom balcony, watching moonlight dance across the Pacific while Anthony slept inside. The children had been in bed for hours, but sleep eluded her completely. Thomas's visit had ripped open wounds she'd thought were healed, exposing raw places that 5 years hadn't been enough to fully mend. "Can't sleep." Anthony's voice drifted from the doorway. "Too much thinking." She didn't turn around, afraid he'd see the confusion in her eyes. Anthony settled beside her on the cushioned bench, pulling a blanket around both their shoulders. "Want to share what you're thinking about?" "I'm thinking about how Connor asked if Thomas was coming back for dinner tomorrow. How Sophia made him a drawing of our family with 6 stick figures instead of 7. How Ethan corrected her and said families can have any number of people, but she insisted our family needed one more. Kids are resilient. They'll adjust to whatever relationship you decide to have with Thomas." Rachel leaned into Anthony's warmth, grateful for his steady presence. "What if I'm making the wrong choice? What if keeping him away is hurting them more than letting him in? What does your gut tell you?" "My gut tells me he's not ready. He's still married to Katie, still choosing the easy path over the complicated one. But my heart..." She pressed her hand to her chest. "My heart remembers loving him. And it breaks for the children who might never know their father because their mother is too proud to risk being hurt again." Anthony was quiet for a long moment, processing words that couldn't have been easy to hear. When he spoke, his voice carried characteristic gentleness. "I fell in love with all 6 of you," he said finally. "You and 5 incredible children who call me Papa but have never stopped wondering about their daddy. If letting Thomas into their lives makes them happy, then I want that for them. Even if it complicates everything for us." Rachel turned to study his profile in the moonlight. "You'd really be okay with that? Sharing them with the man who should have been there from the beginning?" "Rachel, love isn't a finite resource. The children loving Thomas doesn't mean they'd love me less. And you working toward forgiveness doesn't diminish what we have together." The wisdom in his words made her throat tight. This man, this extraordinary man who'd walked into their chaotic life and embraced all of it, was offering to step aside if it meant her children could have their biological father. "I don't deserve you," she whispered. "You deserve everything good this world has to offer. So do those 5 amazing kids sleeping upstairs." Rachel's phone buzzed with a text message. Her heart jumped, expecting Thomas. But the sender was Eleanor Whitmore. Thomas left Katie tonight. He's staying at the Ritz-Carlton. I thought you should know. Rachel stared at the message, her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. Thomas had finally made a choice. Whether it was the right choice remained to be seen, but he'd chosen his children over his wife. What is it? Anthony asked gently. Rachel showed him the message. Anthony read it twice, then handed back her phone. What are you going to do? I don't know. Rachel's voice came out small and uncertain. For 5 years I've been so angry at him for choosing Katie. Now he's unchosen her, and I don't know how to feel about that. You don't have to feel anything right now. You can take time to process what this means for your family. Our family, Rachel corrected. You're part of this family, Anthony. Whatever happens with Thomas doesn't change that. Anthony smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. I love you. All of you. Whatever comes next, we'll figure it out together. Back at the Ritz-Carlton. 12:15 a.m. Thomas lay on hotel bedsheets that cost more than most people's monthly salary, staring at his phone screen showing Rachel's contact information. His thumb hovered over the call button, but what could he say? I left my wife for children who don't know me. I'm sorry it took a cathedral full of witnesses for me to realize what I'd lost. I'm ready to be their father now, if you'll let me try. All true. All pathetically inadequate. The divorce papers were signed and filed. Katie would receive half his assets, the Newport Beach house, and the satisfaction of knowing she'd destroyed another family before walking away. She'd already moved out, taking only her personal belongings and leaving behind 5 years of lies disguised as marriage. His phone rang. Eleanor. How are you holding up? His mother asked without preamble. I've been better. Katie's gone. Like she was never here. Thomas sat up against the headboard. Mother, I need to ask you something. Did you know about the children? Before Sunday. Eleanor's pause answered the question before her words did. I suspected. Rachel's sudden departure, the timing of your elopement with Katie, the way you refused to discuss either topic afterward. But I had no proof, and you seemed so certain you'd made the right choice. You let me believe. I let you make your own mistakes. As every parent must. Eleanor's voice carried 5 years of regret. But seeing those children on Sunday, Thomas, they're magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. And Rachel has done an extraordinary job raising them. She has. With significant help from Dr. Romano, I understand. Thomas winced. Yes. Do you intend to fight for them? For any chance at being their father? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Thomas thought about Connor's eager wave, Sophia's shy smile, Ethan's serious handshake, Logan's trusting touch. 5 children who'd offered him their hearts without reservation, only to watch him walk away because their mother demanded he choose. I don't know if I have the right to fight for them, Thomas admitted. I abandoned them before they were born. I chose their aunt over their mother. I let another man raise them while I played house with a woman who orchestrated the whole disaster. None of that changes the fact that they're your children. They carry your DNA, your eyes, your stubborn cowlick. They're part of you, Thomas, whether you claim them or not. But they're part of Rachel and Anthony too. They're a family. Maybe I should just let them be happy. Is that what you want? To spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been? Thomas closed his eyes, remembering the sound of Logan's giggle, the feel of Connor's arms around his neck, the way Sophia had wanted to show him her princess castle. For one shining afternoon, he'd glimpsed what fatherhood could look like. I want to be their father, he said finally. I want to earn the right to be called Daddy instead of just the man who provided DNA. But I don't know if Rachel will ever trust me enough to let me try. Then you'll have to prove you're worthy of that trust. Day by day, choice by choice, until she believes you've changed from the man who walked away into the man who'll never leave again. After hanging up, Thomas stared at Rachel's contact information for another hour before finally typing a simple message. I signed the divorce papers. Katie's gone. I know this doesn't change anything between us, but I needed you to know that I chose them. I chose our children. If you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life proving I can be the father they deserve." He hit send before he could lose his nerve, then lay back against the pillows to wait for a response that might never come. Outside his window, Newport Beach slept peacefully, unaware that a family was being slowly, carefully rebuilt one difficult choice at a time. 3 months after the golden Ferrari had changed everything, Rachel stood at the same spot where Eleanor Whitmore had first approached her, watching Thomas teach Connor how to cast a fishing line. The Christmas Eve sun painted the Pacific in shades of amber and rose, and her children's laughter carried on the salt-tinged breeze. "Papa, Anthony, look." Sophia ran toward them, clutching a seashell like buried treasure. "It's shaped like a heart." Anthony scooped her up, examining the shell with theatrical seriousness. "That's definitely a magic shell, princess. Make a wish." Rachel smiled, watching the man who'd become papa to her children. The transition hadn't been seamless. Introducing Thomas into their established rhythm had required patience, compromise, and countless conversations about boundaries and expectations. But love, it turned out, was expansive enough to include everyone who deserved a place at their table. "Daddy, Thomas." Ethan's voice carried excited urgency. "The fish are biting." Thomas, Daddy Thomas, as the children had decided to distinguish him from Papa Anthony, helped Ethan reel in what appeared to be a genuine catch. The past 3 months had transformed Thomas from the hollow-eyed man who'd signed divorce papers in a hotel room into someone Rachel barely recognized. Fatherhood suited him in ways wealth and social standing never had. He'd kept every promise he'd made in that midnight text message. Consistent weekend visits that had gradually expanded to include weekday dinners and bedtime stories. Soccer practices and doctor's appointments and the mundane magic of daily life with 5 children. He'd shown up not just for the easy moments, but for the hard ones. Logan's midnight terrors, Connor's stubborn refusal to eat vegetables, Sophia's dramatic meltdowns over mismatched socks. "Mommy, are you crying?" Logan toddled over, his chubby hands reaching up to touch the tears Rachel hadn't realized were falling. "Happy tears, baby boy." She lifted him onto her hip, breathing in his sweet scent of sunscreen and innocence. The pier was busy with Christmas Eve families, but Rachel felt cocooned in their particular bubble of contentment. Thomas and Anthony worked together to help the older children with their fishing lines, their initial awkwardness having evolved into genuine respect and friendship. It had taken time, months of careful navigation, but they'd figured out how to be co-fathers without competition. Anthony's phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. "Emergency surgery." He read it with the resigned expression of a pediatric cardiologist who understood that cardiac emergencies didn't observe holidays. "I have to go," he said, pressing a kiss to Rachel's forehead and ruffling Logan's hair. "Mrs. Chen's baby needs valve repair surgery tonight." Christmas Eve surgery? Rachel's heart ached for the family spending their holiday in a cardiac ICU. The heart doesn't care about holidays. Anthony kissed each child goodbye, accepted their disappointed protests with gentle promises to return as soon as possible, then headed toward the parking lot with the brisk stride of a man racing to save a life. Thomas approached with the other children clustering around him like satellites. "Everything okay?" "Emergency surgery. He'll be back tomorrow morning if everything goes well." Thomas nodded, understanding the weight that came with medical careers. "Kids, want to go get hot chocolate while we wait for the sunset?" As they walked toward the pier's snack stand, Rachel marveled at how naturally Thomas had slipped into the rhythm of their lives. No dramatic declarations or grand gestures, just steady presence and the quiet heroism of showing up every day. "Mommy," Connor tugged on her sweater, "can we tell Daddy Thomas about Christmas morning now?" Rachel smiled. 3 months ago, the children had been strangers meeting their father for the first time. Now Connor was bursting with excitement over the surprise they'd planned for Christmas morning. "Tell me what?" Thomas asked, crouching to Connor's eye level. "We have a present for you," Sophia announced, unable to contain herself any longer. "A big one." "The biggest," Ethan agreed with his characteristic seriousness. Thomas looked at Rachel with confusion and something that might have been hope. "What are they talking about?" Rachel pulled out her phone, scrolling to the email she'd received that morning. The California Family Court approved your petition for joint custody. Effective January 1st, you're officially their legal father. Thomas went completely still. For a moment, Rachel worried he might collapse right there on the pier. Legal father, he repeated as if testing the words. Full parental rights. Joint custody. Everything you requested. Rachel's voice softened. Everything they deserve. Thomas sank onto a nearby bench, overwhelmed. For 3 months, he'd been visiting his children as a guest in their lives, always aware that his presence depended entirely on Rachel's continued goodwill. The legal recognition changed everything. We're really a family now? Connor asked with 4-year-old directness. We've always been a family, buddy, Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. Now it's just official. The children piled onto the bench beside him, chattering excitedly about Christmas morning plans and New Year's resolutions and the fishing trip Thomas had promised for next weekend. Rachel watched her ex-husband, no, her children's father, absorb their love with the wonder of a man who'd almost lost everything and somehow been given a second chance. Her phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. The whole family is invited for Christmas dinner tomorrow. Fair warning, I've bought enough presents to spoil 5 grandchildren completely rotten. Rachel showed Thomas the message, and he laughed. The first genuinely carefree laugh she'd heard from him since their divorce. She's been shopping for 5 years' worth of missed birthdays and Christmases, he explained. I tried to stop her, but she threatened to disinherit me if I interfered with her grandmotherly duties. Grammy Eleanor is the best, Sophia declared. She teaches us piano and lets us paint her fingernails. Rachel thought about the woman who'd approached her on this same pier 3 months ago, desperate to know her grandchildren. Eleanor had become a constant presence in their lives. Piano lessons for Sophia, chess games with Ethan, endless patience for Connor's dinosaur facts, and the kind of unconditional love that made Logan giggle whenever she entered a room. The Whitmore family had expanded to include all of them, even Anthony. Eleanor had insisted on it, declaring that any man good enough to help raise her grandchildren was family by extension. There's something else, Rachel said, her heart hammering as she approached the conversation they'd been dancing around for weeks. About us. About what happens next. Thomas's attention sharpened. They'd carefully avoided discussing their own relationship while building his connection to the children, but the question hung between them like unfinished business. I've been thinking, Rachel continued, about forgiveness. About second chances. About the difference between the man who left me 5 years ago and the man who's been showing up for our children every day since September. Thomas waited, hardly breathing. I'm not ready to go backward, Rachel said carefully. I can't pretend the last 5 years didn't happen or that the hurt just disappears because you've proven you can be a good father. Thomas nodded, disappointment flickering across his features. But, Rachel continued, I might be ready to go forward. Slowly. Carefully. With the understanding that we're different people now than we were when we were married. Hope bloomed in Thomas's eyes. What does that mean? It means maybe we could start over. Get to know each other again as the people we've become instead of the people we used to be. Rachel's voice carried the vulnerability of someone risking her heart for the second time. It means maybe love isn't just about the passion we had when we were young, but about choosing each other every day, even when it's complicated. Thomas reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers for the first time in 5 years. I'd like that. I'd like to earn your love again, instead of just expecting it. And I'd like to learn whether the man you've become is someone I could love again. The sunset painted their faces golden as they sat surrounded by their children, watching the Pacific reflect Christmas Eve light. It wasn't the dramatic reunion of romance novels or the neat resolution of fairy tales. It was something better. The messy, complicated, deeply human process of healing and hope. Tell us in the comments. Do you believe in second chances when it comes to love and family? Share this story with someone who needs to believe that it's never too late to choose what matters most. Mommy. Logan's sleepy voice drew her attention. Are we going home now? Rachel looked around at her extraordinary family. 5 children who'd never stopped believing in love, an ex-husband learning to be a father, a boyfriend who'd loved them all enough to step aside when necessary, and a future that stretched ahead of them full of possibility. "Yeah, baby boy," she said, lifting Logan higher on her hip. "We're going home." But home, she realized, wasn't a place anymore. It was this collection of hearts that had somehow found their way back to each other despite every reason they shouldn't have. It was Thomas's steady presence and Anthony's gentle strength and 5 children who'd taught them all that love multiplied instead of divided when you opened your heart wide enough. As they walked back toward the parking lot, Thomas carrying a sleeping Sophia while Connor and Ethan raced ahead, Rachel felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't experienced in 5 years. Complete peace. The golden Ferrari sat gleaming in the parking lot, a reminder of the day everything had changed. But it was no longer a symbol of anger or revenge. Now it represented transformation. The moment when a woman who thought she'd lost everything realized she'd actually found herself. 6 months later, on a beach in Maui where Rachel and Thomas renewed their vows with 5 children as witnesses and Anthony as Thomas's best man, Connor would ask why Mommy and Daddy had needed 2 weddings. Sophia would explain that sometimes people need practice at being married. And Ethan would declare that their family was proof that even broken things could be fixed if you loved them enough. But that's a story for another day. For now, it was enough that love had found its way home, carried on the laughter of children and the courage of adults brave enough to believe in second chances.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.